One of the things that Engels emphasizes is that socialism can only succeed politically and economically if it's based on some sound scientific theory.
And it isn't. Okay, that didn't take long.
And it was this conviction that led Marx to devote so many years of his life to uncovering what he called the laws of motion of capitalism.
No, it was the fact that he was a spoiled rich brat who never wanted to take responsibility for anything, including the child that was a product of him raping his maid.
He wanted to show what the underlying basis was for the class division of society.
Which assumes that there is one under capitalism. There isn't.
And in all this, the key to his analysis was the labour theory of value, something which had been developed by previous political economists, but which he brought to its final development.
What previous economists like Adam Smith and David Ricardo developed could more accurately be described as cost theory of value. They theorized that the value of a good or service was determined by the cost of its inputs. Unlike Marx, they realized that this theory has limitations that they couldn't figure out how to correct. Marx not only had no such realization, he cut out all of the costs other than labor and said that that was the only one that really mattered. In particular, he removed capital costs entirely.
How it has been attacked, both from the standpoint of the subjective theory of value.
Now, you've been saying all along that you want to be scientifically correct. Well, subjective theory of value has been shown to be correct over and over again. So it attacks labor theory of value in the same way that the Copernican model of the solar system attacks the flat Earth. You had to use the word attack because you couldn't bring yourself to use the proper word. Disprove.
And from the standpoint of what's been called the transformation problem.
Which is a major problem Marxists haven't solved. How do you equate, say, an hour of data entry with an hour of manual labor lifting heavy weights? Are they both the same because they take an hour? Is the latter more valuable because it takes more effort? Is the former more valuable because it can produce more units of output in an hour? Or does that make it less valuable? Marxists have been completely unable to solve this problem.
At its simplest, it says that the average price of a good will be proportional to the average labor used to make it.
If all other things are equal, then sure, nobody denies this. The cost of labor is one factor. But we know today that it's much more complex than that. Increased cost of labor will push the supply curve to the left, resulting in higher prices and lower quantities. For some reason, Marxists never seem to want to look at the quantities. And as he goes on to talk about this, he keeps making the disclaimer, within an industry. But why? If labor theory of value is true, why should an equal amount of labor be worth different amounts in different industries?
It had been almost universally accepted in the early 19th century. The leading economists all believed in it. But by the mid-century, it was being criticized in establishment circles because it was seen as politically risky. And then, by the late 19th century, only socialists still supported it, whereas most orthodox economists had moved to alternative theories from marginalism or subjectivism.
Marginal utility solved all the problems people had. Why was a diamond found lying on the ground worth more than a gallon of water you had to dig for? Why was a gallon of water worth more in the desert than it was in a typical city? No economist, not even Marx, had an answer to this question before Carl Menger formulated the law of diminishing marginal utility. And then Alfred Marshall formulated that into the modern supply and demand model.
And these alternatives remain the orthodoxy that is taught to students in economics to this day.
Notice again how he's playing with language, using words like orthodoxy to make out like it's some kind of religion or something, as opposed to scientific theories that have stood the test of well over a century of scrutiny. It's exactly like what the flat earthers do.
Let's look at some of the lines of attack that conservative economists have used.
Nice work shoving the word conservative in there. Basically, no economists other than a few fringe Marxists still adhere to the labor theory of value. Even most socialist economists have turned away from it.
Basically, it's a matter of Occam's razor, which says you shouldn't multiply entities beyond causes. At any one time, all you can observe is a combination of a certain quantity of goods being sold and a price. And you can observe this different quantities being sold on different days. If you're going to explain that in terms of two curves, you're inventing more unknown entities.
Wow, and we have a deliberate warping of Occam's razor. But Occam's razor does not say that a theory is wrong because it has extra entities. In fact, if those entities solve problems that you can't solve without them, you don't want to remove them. Those curves are necessary to explain what we see. Labor theory of value causes so many problems that supply and demand solves. Why would anyone with more than 2 brain cells to knock together think that Occam's razor goes against it?
Because a curve, even in its simplest form of a straight line, requires at least 2 constants to define it. If it's not a straight line but has some degree of curvature, you'll require 3, 4, many constants to define it.
The supply-demand model does not exist so you can plot out everything precisely in a curve. It's there to show you the relationship between various elements. It's qualitative, not quantitative. But just because it's impossible to calculate precisely where these curves are, doesn't mean things don't work this way. Especially when we know things don't work the way Marx said they do.
If you have a series of made-up or unknown constants, and there are more unknown constants than observables, then you have a theory which is unfalsifiable.
It's your Marxist fantasy that's unfalsifiable. Want to falsify supply-demand theory? Okay, show a downward-sloping supply curve, or an upward-sloping demand curve. We've seen all sorts of cases where it conforms to the model. Can you show one case where it hasn't?
You can't have more unknowns in your model than there are data points.
Wow, well, there goes all of quantum mechanics then.
Now, any scientific theory has to be one that makes predictions that can be put to observational test.
Yes, and when we test things the Marxist way by implementing socialism, we get economic ruination and starvation. When we implement capitalism, in other words, when we leave people alone to interact voluntarily and let prices do as they will, people, especially the poor and working class, become much better off. It's happened that way every single time.
If the money value is closely correlated with the labour content, then the predictions of the labour theory of value have been confirmed.
But the competing theories don't claim they would be uncorrelated. The way you examine something scientifically is that you find a test that will come out one way if the first theory is correct, and a different way if the second theory is correct. You can't look at something that both models predict and claim victory when it turns out that way. If labor theory of value were true, then consumer demand would be irrelevant. But we know it isn't. Therefore, labor theory of value is falsified. Checkmate, loser!
You can do it nowadays, since all countries publish what are called input-output tables for their economies.
Oh, for crying out loud, how many times do we have to debunk this point? See my previous video on labor theory of value for more details. If this model works, then why did the Soviet Union fall? That's the exact model they used for their economy. It failed because input-output analysis doesn't work. It doesn't account for things like substitutions. We've seen plenty of times where increase in output doesn't require a corresponding increase in input. There's no mechanism for price adjustments. It doesn't allow for joint production. All sorts of things. Oh, but you're the scientific one. Right. It should be consumers that determine output, not central planners.
There are just a couple of extreme outliers here.
Ha! Now who's explaining away contrary data?
And those turn out to be the oil and oil refining industries, the value whose output is rather higher than you would predict by their labour content. But these are what the classical economists call natural monopolies.
Natural monopolies are another concept that's been absolutely 100% debunked. And the oil industry is far from a natural monopoly. Yes, this is his one and only means of support, and it fails massively.
And it's extraordinary how strong the correlation is.
Compared to what? What does supply-demand theory say the correlation should be? Do you see how you're not doing any kind of science at all? Hey, Hey, thanks for watching. Please hit like and subscribe and keep these videos coming by donating, becoming a subscriber and getting special benefits, or even for free with airtime. And check out all the great content here, like this video selected just for you.